Welcome to part 1 of Building a Project Timeline for SOX 404. In this session, I'm going to dive into a lot of details on how we build a project timeline and the rationale behind it. We cover questions like, what does the whole year's timeline look like? What key activities and processes to include in the timeline? When should we do the risk assessment? When should we do the COSO 2013 framework mapping? When should we do reports and spreadsheets testing? Should we include audit committee meetings? And should we include the external auditors? What does the annual SOX timeline look like? So here's what one looks like, assuming the year end is December 31st. If your year end is different, you can shift the months to meet your year end and how your months work out. We use Excel because 99% of the companies out there use Excel, and it's easy to make changes and share amongst the team. Now I have a column on the left listing the key processes or major activities we have to do for SOX. And then on the top row is a listing of the months and the weeks within the month. I start with February 2016 and extend it to February 2017. The reason we start SOX planning around February or March is because January is one of the busiest times for you. You're closing out the books for the previous year, you're wrapping up your financial statement audits, we're wrapping up the SOX audit, we're preparing 10Ks, preparing press releases, preparing board meetings, so you don't have to plan for SOX yet. By the time all of that is done, most companies start planning in March or late February. So what key activities or processes do we include in the timeline? Let's go down the list of processes or types of activities that you would need. We have the basic risk assessment and planning, the COSO 2013 framework mapping, the equity process, order to cash, financial close and reporting, fixed assets, HR, payroll, IT general controls, entity level controls, procure to pay, tax, and treasury. What's missing on here could be an inventory process. If your company sells inventory or has hardware, then you want to include inventory. If your company has large construction projects, maybe you're a construction company or you're building wind farms, you need a construction management or construction project financing because those are key processes. We just built this timeline as an example for a service or software company. So let me walk you through the logic of how we laid out certain activities to happen during certain months. Here's a colorful legend of the activities. Let's look at the fruity tooty colored Gantt chart because we wanted the activities to quickly jump out at people, not just what the words say, but the colors help us differentiate. So dark blue is the documentation, green is the walkthrough, the lighter blue is your round 1 testing, the pinkish peach is the round 2, you have round 3 testing, and we even have place markers for meetings. So when should we start the risk assessment? When should we do that? Now we kick off all our SOX 404 projects with a risk assessment and planning. That's why you see planning and risk assessment at the very top. And in previous sessions, we discussed starting with a top-down approach. So you want to do the risk assessment and materiality first so you can plan out which processes and which controls to focus on instead of overdoing it by working on the lower risk processes. And we start with the risk assessment that takes about a week or 2. The activity itself doesn't take a whole 2 weeks. It's something you could do in 8 hours if you have all the information and all the people available. You want to reach out and talk to your management team after you've done the risk assessment. If you're the controller preparing this, or if you're the SOX director preparing this, you want to talk to the controller and CFO and make sure that the risks that you have signed make sense, the activities or locations that you've identified make sense. When should we do the COSO 2013 framework mapping? So that's the next part. If you are already public company, you've done your COSO 2013 mapping because it was required to be adopted in 2013 or 14. But if your company is new to SOX compliance or you're getting ready for an IPO, this activity is something that you'll need to do. Now, why do I have COSO mapping way at the end in June over here? The reason is efficiency. If we map controls or attempt to do it in February or March before the processes and the controls are finalized, we risk having to redo the work if the control language changes or you add new controls. Doing the COSO mapping in June allows us to step back so you have a holistic view of where all the controls fall in the 17 principles. Are there any controls missing? If you start the COSO mapping at the beginning of the year, you may not know where all your controls are anyways. So looking at your COSO mapping in June, you find more holes and there's still time to implement new controls if needed. When should we do reports and spreadsheet testing? Now we include report and spreadsheet testing in the timeline so that we remember to schedule it. A lot of times it can be done in conjunction with the current testing in the various processes. But there's so much more emphasis now by the external auditors on testing reports and spreadsheets. So we add this line in so that it doesn't become a rush job for your IT team or for your finance team. Should we include audit committee meetings? Notice in our timeline that we built a placeholder for audit committee meetings. The reason is that audit committee meetings typically happen 4 times a year, and about a week before the audit committee meeting, management will need the results of our testing and our process. So it's good planning to build the audit committee meetings into the timeline so you know when it's coming up. And we also need to usually send our slides in advance of the deadline. So it's there for you as a reminder. Should we include the external auditors? The short answer is yes, include the external auditors. We put it in our timeline to remind ourselves to talk to them after we've done the risk assessment, after we've done our documentation, and after we've done our testing. Always sharing and communicating with them so that there are no surprises in case we have to redo something or if there are disagreements on how much we're testing. So to recap, we've covered the annual SOX timeline, what that looks like, what key activities and processes we include in the timeline, when we need to do the risk assessment, when we do the COSO 2013 mapping, when we do reports and spreadsheets testing, and why we include the audit committee and the external auditors on our project timeline. See you next time.